Hi, it's Carol Mulligan again, and this time I'd like to talk about the essay Learning to Read and Write, Superman and Me, and how it helps you to understand using inference to add meaning when you read. Now, your reflections and discussions of the deeper meanings of the essays we've read are very interesting, but it's apparent that only some of you did any preliminary research about the author, Virginia Woolf, before reading and commenting on her essay, The Death of a Moth. When one has access to the internet, not reading about the author to gain additional insight is short-sighted because it may limit your further understanding of the material. Doing early research facilitates critical reading because it is much easier to engage in a conversation with the author, as Samuel Cohen suggests, when you know the author better because you know their historical, geographic, and cultural contexts. So just imagine how the meaning of this essay, The Death of the Moth, would be for those who did not know that Woolf was manic depressive, suffered from serious depressions, and then committed suicide shortly after writing the essay. When you read The Death of the Moth, armed with that knowledge, the struggle between life and death takes on colossal proportions in the essay and helps you understand differently the meaning of that little moth inside the window, fluttering back and forth, struggling. So let's look a little bit more at inference in reading. Taking the material on the printed page and combining it with facts from one's own fund of knowledge and reasoning in order to develop additional meaning is called inference. In our last essay, The Joy of Reading and Writing, Alexa used the pictures on the page to infer what the words on the page might say. That he could infer at such a young age was amazing, but really all readers do similar things when they read a passage with an unfamiliar word in it, and rather than looking it up in the dictionary, try to figure out the word's meaning by the context in which it is used. We all do that. Our vocabularies are expanded that way. So consider this excerpt from an essay. Jason finished off the accident report, listening with one ear to the dispatcher's radio. Then he put the car in gear and pulled onto the interstate again. Although it's never stated explicitly, what things can be inferred from this scenario? Well, the essay states that Jason filled out an accident report, Jason listened to a dispatch radio, and Jason is parked by an interstate highway. We know from our own general funds of knowledge that police fill out accident reports. We know that police listen to dispatchers' radios. And we know that it's usually state highway patrol people, officers who patrol the highways. So it's kind of a question of taking 2 plus 2 and inferring your own conclusion. And in this case, because we know from the essay the things that are said, and we add from our own general fund of knowledge, the things we know about people who fill out accident reports and listen to dispatchers' radios and patrol interstate highways, that in all probability, we've reached the conclusion that Jason is probably a state highway patrol officer. That's using inference to read in between the lines, or to put the author's writing together with your own knowledge and reach a different conclusion or an additional conclusion about the essay. So let's look at Learning to Read and Write, Superman and Me again. In this essay, The author Sherman Alexie tells us he is a smart Indian man who grew up on a reservation and taught himself to read. On pages 16 and 17, he describes the process of how he taught himself to read. This is a beautiful example of how he used inference to teach himself what the words on the page might say. And he describes that on pages 16 and 17. In 2 paragraphs, he describes using inference or guessing to teach himself what the words under the pictures in the Superman comic book said. Now, the essay itself, the one that Alexie wrote, says Indian children were expected to fail to learn to read. And Indian children who failed were appropriately, why do we use that, pitied by non-Indians because they were assumed to be stupid. Well, if they assume that they're going to be stupid, then the white people can pity or feel sorry for them. He also says that most Indian children lived up to those expectations and struggled or failed to learn to read or write. Now we know from our own funds of knowledge that historically it has been whites who both distrusted and pitied Native American Indians, seeing them as incapable of learning things. We know that the white teachers, therefore, expected their Indian students to be incapable of learning to read well. And we also know that those beliefs are stereotypical and inaccurate and prejudicial because many Indians are smart and have learned to read very well. So we reach some inferred conclusions. First being, of course, that white people were prejudiced. Now, we may know that from our own knowledge also, but it's a conclusion we can draw from this essay. We can conclude that Alexie himself as an Indian was offended and angered by their prejudice. And we can conclude that he published his essay in the Los Angeles Times, so it's predominantly white readers would know how they doomed Indian children to failure with their prejudice. He also tells us that his current students either do not or will not read, so we infer that the prejudices against Indians persists even to this day. Now, when I asked for what purpose Alexie might have written this essay, some students have said it was to motivate his students to learn to read. True, he may motivate his student, but logically, why would that not be the answer as to why he wrote this particular essay? It was in my research that I learned that this essay was first published in the Los Angeles Times in 1998, which is recently by literary standards. Therefore, it's not logical to assume that people who don't read are going to be reading the essays in the Los Angeles Times. So he must be trying to reach a different audience. And I sort of generalized that the population of the Los Angeles Times readership is probably mostly white people, perhaps with a growing minority of Hispanics, but it's probably not mostly Indians. And therefore, this essay was targeted at the white people, the very white people that he's already angry with. And I've since learned that that's probably true because I also have learned that Sherman Alexie is a Native American Indian activist working to change attitudes and policies used by the government in dealing with Indians.